Thank you, Morgan. It's really exciting to be part of the first Beers and Banter at the new museum. And thank you all for coming. What a great crowd. I think if everybody became a new member, they'd almost reach their goal. We're pretty close. And did I miss these? There we go. Thank you. A little windy still. All right. So as you all know, we are here to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Paul Petzoldt's first climb of the Grand Teton, which is today. He summited on July 25th, 1924. And that climb set Paul on the path to becoming the area's first mountain climbing guide. So within 5 years of the climb that happened 100 years ago today, he had the official concession for climbing school in the brand new Grand Teton National Park. And that school has been operating ever since. When it started, it was the Petzoldt School of American Mountaineering, but now most of you probably know it as Exum Mountain Guides. It has been Exum Mountain Guides for over 60 years. Paul also went on to found the National Outdoor Leadership School, or NOLS. And while Paul certainly had his faults, as do most of us, it's fair to say that through Exum and through NOLS, he has directly or indirectly introduced literally hundreds of thousands of people to climbing and to the joy of being in the outdoors. So I think for that, we owe him great thanks, and part of this is to celebrate that. So we're going to have a rare treat. We are going to listen to Paul describe that first climb in his own words and from a talk he gave later in life. And spliced into it, you will get to see the photos from that very first climb that historian and collector Ron Yates discovered, recognized their value, knew they were not to be tossed out. So he is sharing them with us tonight. For also, we are very grateful. That's Ron there, by the way. I'll introduce him later. So I'm curious, how many of you knew Paul Petzoldt or met him? Let's have a show of hands. How many people here knew Paul? All right, we got quite a few people that knew him. I unfortunately never got to meet him myself, so I'm excited that we have so many people here who knew him in the flesh. Obviously, I've done a lot of reading and research about him, so I know a lot about his story, but I'm sure some of you can tell us some of your own stories. And if you do have a story, think about it, because we would like you to share it with us. After the video, so we have this video, then we're going to start up with a couple of stories from Andy and Nancy Carson, who are here tonight and have been longtime friends of Paul Petzoldt. And then we'll open it up to stories that any of you might want to share, and also any questions you have for me or Ron or Andy or Nancy. So that's the plan for tonight. So before we watch the video, I want to share with you a couple of stories about Paul's childhood that I think will help us understand his love of mountains. And that love began when he was very, very young. So he was born in Iowa in 1908. He barely knew his father. His father died of diphtheria when he was only 3 years old. His mother later moved them to Twin Falls, Idaho, when he was about 9. He was the youngest of 9 children, and the family really struggled to keep the farm going and a roof over their heads. He and his brothers would take dusty trails down into the Snake River Canyon, because when they moved to Twin Falls, they had a farm, a ranch on the top of the canyon. And so they would go down into the canyon to hunt and fish. So one day, when he was no more than 11 years old, he finished his chores and was daydreaming. He was lying on the edge of the canyon, as he often did, and he was looking down into it. And he noticed that there was sort of a ledge below. And maybe below that, there was another ledge. And he thought, wait a minute, can I climb down that? And so, of course, he had to find out. So he lowered himself off the edge and started down climbing, all the way to the riverbank below, which was maybe 1,000 feet. I'm not sure if it was that high, but I have heard, Ron is telling me there are several sources that say 1,000, but 400 seems more accurate. It's still quite high. Obviously, he fell, he would have been in trouble. Anyway, he was elated when he got down to the river and sunk his toes into the sandy bank. So he roamed around for a while and then realized it was getting late. Figured he'd better get back up. So he thought, okay, now I got to climb back up. Climbing back up, he found to be a little bit easier, except when he made the mistake of looking down. But he kept on going and got back up over the edge and then ran home to tell his mother of his accomplishment. She wasn't quite as enthusiastic about it as he was, but by then she knew that he just had this innate zest for adventure, and she didn't want to discourage him. Now, when Paul was little, his older sister would read adventure stories to him, often tales involving mountains, and he relished the pictures he saw of the Alps and other mountain ranges. And then as he got older, he devoured more and more of these stories on his own. So he had been really excited when the family moved to Idaho, because there were mountains in Idaho, and he thought he was actually going to get to see them. But when they got to Twin Falls, the Sawtooths were way off in the distance, and he was rather disappointed because he desperately wanted to be in what he considered real mountains. And he frequently would imagine himself standing on an airy peak, gazing off into the lands below as if he were a character in one of the adventure stories that he loved so much. So when he was about 13, he asked his mother if he could go on a 100-mile cross-country trip to see the Sawtooth Mountains. He knew she likely wouldn't be all that excited about it, so he very carefully calculated out everything, the route, how many supplies he would need, how he would manage their horse, Old Shorty, and the cart, and then hoped that the convincing thing would be that he'd bring his friend Chico and his dog Ranger along. So she purportedly sighed and then set about making cookies and apple pie for them to take with him, because she knew it was something he had to do. So they were gone anywhere from a week to 2 weeks, I think, and the sheriff in the first town they reached thought for sure these were a couple of hooligans, and it took Paul some convincing to let the sheriff know that, yes, indeed, they did have their parents' permission and they were allowed to be on this journey. So even back then, some people were concerned about the idea of two 13-year-old boys going on a 100-mile cross-country trek. When they finally reached the foothills, Paul could hardly sleep that night. He was so excited because he was finally going to get into the mountains. But over the next few days, after hiking up multiple peaks, only to find flat, rounded summits, many of them with trees blocking the view, he was really disappointed. There were no steep cliffs, there were no snowy peaks. These were not real mountains. So they hung out for a bit, fished a little bit, and then finally headed for home. But they lost control of the cart on a steep slope, and it crashed and broke. The front wheels broke off from the back wheels. The buggy was totally a wreck. They managed to pile their supplies on the front wheels and dragged it home, but they could no longer ride it. So they basically limped back to Twin Falls, covered in gray lava dust. The horse was almost lame. They were almost out of food and water. But Paul's mother was so happy to see them that he did not get in big trouble for having destroyed the cart. So all this is to say that by the time Paul met Ralph Herron in the summer of 1924 and took him up on his invitation to go to Jackson's Hole to see Ralph's relatives who lived there, he was primed to enthusiastically embrace the Tetons, which he did, and he will tell you about that in the video. So what I want to do now is I want to introduce you to Ron Yates, who is the collector responsible for finding the photos that Paul and Ralph took on this first climb. Ron comes to us from Twin Falls, Idaho, where he has been living temporarily since 1982. As a child, Ron was introduced to American history by reading storybooks, much like Paul, and touring museums with his family. He served a term as a volunteer with the fledgling City of Twin Falls Historic Preservation Committee from 2008 to 2010. And then he was elected and served as president of the Twin Falls County Historical Society from 2010 to 2012. He's the author of the Perrine Stagecoach, a historical review, and he has a copy of it over here if you want to take a look at it. He is equally happy up on a ladder or out on a limb, as he is a master gardener and an arborist. And his talent at discovering historical artifacts and then finding ways to unite them with the people who will most benefit has resulted in increased interest in local history and has led him to tonight's presentation. So I'm going to let him take it away.
Well, thank you, Kim. I appreciate the introduction, and it's my honor and privilege to be here tonight. And hopefully this will be of great interest to you and a little bit of fun and memorable as well. We all have our own histories. And so when we can see something like what Paul Petzoldt, I call it his multi-level marketing plan, where everyone actually earned a profit in this instance, because the people who are interested in mountaineering followed his lead, and he created a lot of a following with exuberance. And as we move along here, just a little bit about myself. I collect, since I managed my father-in-law's estate, I began to market and photographs. I collect them myself, Idaho subject, but when I get a box of non-Idaho subjects, I have to market them elsewhere. And I usually find a different place to sell them. And it's a real joy to see the buyer who really wants these items and united with them for their purpose. And I have the same feeling when I find something I'm looking for with Idaho history. So it's really a charge for me. When I bought these negatives, they were with a large collection that I bought from another collector. And to break it down, there were 9 eras in the Petzoldt collection, 9 different eras between 1922 and 1929 in this collection, about 164 negatives. And there are 6 different sizes of negatives. So it was quite a sort to make sure they were all from the same camera, from the same era, and the same subject. And once I got that established, I discovered a little bit more about Paul Petzoldt. And as I discovered how important he was in some ways, I discovered this video that was done in 1992. At age 84, Paul was addressing these classmen about his Wilderness Education Association at the North Country Community College in Saranac, New York, April 27th, 1992. And to give credit to Jack Drury, who made the video and posted it online on YouTube. You can watch this yourself. He posted 2 Petzoldt videos. This one is really relevant to what we're doing. So now that we have this video of him narrating his story in 1924, I have the photographs that dovetail with the facts that he's talking about. And the photographs came to me, and I thought, well, I'm going to share these so that people can understand what he's talking about, and also bring him to light with his video, because he's a character. He's well received by his audience at the time. And my discovery of the photos are really important to validate what he's saying. Right? Photos have an exact memory. They're what's the old word? Trying to figure that word. Anyway, they remember perfectly. Paul doesn't remember the day for results. So I like photographs because they represent exactly what happens. And I do a lot of my research through photographs, because if the photographs tell me there's no memory problem, there's nobody that I have to talk to describe what's in there. As we watch the video, look at how the photographs are composed. His friend Ralph Herron, that he had just met 23 days before he came here and climbed the Grand, was a little bit of an artist, and he wrote a lot of poetry, and he was a playwright. He wrote plays and marketed his plays that he wrote in small towns. So the photographs were very well composed, and I kind of feel as if they were created in 1924 for specific presentation for that tonight's presentation, because here they are. And only a few of them may have been seen before in different venues, probably in a photograph album or something like that. And also keep in mind that my photographs are on the sideline here, and these are for sale. I sell photographs. And I'd like a collector to buy these, or someone who will buy them and donate them to where they could be used or interpreted. And so if you have an urge to photograph something, please resist that urge and respect the fact that the buyer of these photographs eventually is the one who's going to control them. So we are videoing my presentation, so it can be watched on YouTube later and with the Historical Society, but your own particular Facebook or something like that, please resist that urge to make any photographs of these. And hopefully they'll be out in the public soon. And part of my work is to monetize things that are old in my local area. And when they have value and they create attention, people get interested. And it has happened time and time again with my help and other people's help in Twin Falls. So it's really important to sometimes put a dollar value on some things like this so that it gets people's attention. And they're, well, why is this worth so much? Well, oh, geez, I was part of that. I was part of that. So we're all historians ourselves. So let's roll this and begin the video.
Back to conversation.
I don't know how I got started in this. I read, maybe it was Jack London said he was walking down the street and he came to a corner and he didn't know whether to go this way or he didn't know whether to go that way. Finally decided to go this way. And there he met a guy that was going to sea, and guy had him get on the boat with him, and they read out that this happened to his life and this happened to his life and this happened to his life. And the guy had been if I just turned the other way and gone down the street the other way. And maybe that's me when this kid came out to Idaho and I got acquainted with him. He says, I got some relatives up in Jackson Hole. I'm going to Jackson Hole. You want to go with me? Well, anybody that lived in Idaho didn't want to go to Jackson Hole because there were legends there. There were elk and there were proud and there were outlaws and it was a great place, but there was also a lot of myth. Jackson's Hole was a lot greater. So we started to hitchhike up there. And we come around the corner of Idaho Falls, and there was the Tetons out there. Now I'd gone through the sawtooths with my older brothers. I have four of them. I'm the youngest of 9 children. And I went up there salmon fishing with them, hunting them. Well, I carried a gun to school and shot pheasants on the way home. I was an outdoor kid. But here are these Tetons, and I don't know who said it first. Let's climb the Grand Teton. Okay, let's climb it. So finally, we got a ride over Teton Pass from Idaho, which was the only road then going into Jackson's Hole. You notice I say Jackson's Hole, it's Jackson Hole, how it's good. But Jackson's Hole, Jackson was the old trapper in the beaver trapping days, and that's where he pulled up for the winter. And over the other side of the Tetons was Pierre's Hole, and Pierre was the trapper over there, and he pulled up over there. So it was Jackson's Hole. But I'll never forget going up to that pass. We stopped 3 or 4 times to put in water in this old Model T Ford. And every time we put water in it, it would be like Old Faithful and shoot up. And then finally, it got so it wouldn't go anymore. The road became very steep. So he knew what to do. He turned it around and we backed up the steep one. And that was SOP in those days, for Model Ts. Those of you who haven't been in the military, SOP is standard operating procedure. Because they didn't have gas pumps in those days, and it's hard to make gas run uphill. And the tank was under the dashboard, and there was a hole in front of the windshield. But on the level road, the tank was higher than the carburetor, So the gas would run the carburetor. If you started up like this, suddenly the gas tank got a zero or lower than the carburetor. And for some reason, the gas just couldn't flow into the carburetor. So you turn it around and you get the tank up above the carburetor. That's all it took. And we told him that we were going to climb this Grand Teton. And he was aghast. No human foot has ever been up there. I've been up there up and down the chute, and nobody's ever going to climb that mountain. Well, I said, we said, well, we heard that Billy, a fellow named Billy Owen, had climbed it in 1898. And he had it from Wyoming rancher with him by the name of Hughes. And the fellow said, well, I know old Pete lives up there on Norman Road, and I guess if he said he got to the top, maybe he did. But he said, you kids have got no business going up there. And then we got to the top of the pass finally. And I'll never forget somebody, they had a sign out there. Howdy, stranger. Yonder, and I looked down yonder, there you saw the valley down there with the Snake River running through it. Yonder lies Jackson's Hole, the last of the Old West. It still thrills me when I think of that. But about that time, he commented in Jackson Hole Rees, this don't have any brakes. So, that was a little disconcerting, but he knew what to do. He got his axe out and chopped down a pine tree. We helped him drag it over and back of the board. He took out a chain, put it around the axle and put it to the pine tree, and down we went. Not only holding us back, but really smoothing out the road at the same time. We got down at the bottom and he stopped and backed up a little bit, loosened the chain and said, help me throw this over the bank. And so we threw it over the bank, and I looked down there and there were a lot of oak trees down there. So we got into Jackson Hole. We asked where the Kellys lived, and we went up there to meet Ralph Herron's relatives. And no sooner we got there than here came Jim Francis, then and later famous sheriff. And he was dressed like Hollywood. He had his hog leg on here, and strapped on, and his boots and his Stetson. You kids folks know you're here? I hear you're going to climb the Grand Teton. Don't think you should do it, boys. I think you should go home. Well, we didn't want to be deported, but he said we would contact him the next day. But luckily for us, and this probably changed my life too, William O. Owen, who would run the baselines across your land out there, because you own a lot of land out west, you see. He didn't own anything back here because the king gave it all to some individual. But out there, you made the Louisiana Purchase. That's all your land. And the only way it ever got out of your ownership is the fact that somebody homesteaded or had a mining claim, or they gave somebody the railroads. It's still yours. Still yours. All Forest Service land is yours. All the own land is yours. And a lot of the rest of it is yours. So you own a lot of land out there, Wyoming. You didn't know it from us. But Billy Owen was visiting there, and he heard the rumor, which I'm sure went through town like wildfire. You damn fool kids are saying they're going to climb the Grand Teton. And we were kids, 16 years of age. And Billy Owen heard this, and he sent a message up. He wanted to talk to us. And we went down and talked to him, and he didn't discourage us. He told us the way he'd gone up in 1898, how he tried it 6 times before then in various places. But the last time they went up there, and they had the local blacksmith make some iron spikes that they were going to drive in and try to get up this wall that blocked them from getting on the upper part of the mountain. But while they were there, they were looking around and they saw they could swing around the mountain a little bit. And there was a ledge about that wide that they could crawl along, looking down on the top of the pine trees 3,000 or 4,000 feet below. And after they got across that claw, he called it, there were some chimneys that they could climb up. And he told us all about it. And he even said that he'd get a car to take us over the wagon road and across the ferry. There's a little bridge across the Snake River, across the ferry and take us up to through the mountains. So we spent our last money for a few cans of pork and beans and some sardines. But we had our sleeping bags with us, which were made up of 2 patchwork quilts I'd taken from my mother's closet, perhaps a note. And so we were prepared to go. And he was taking us early in the morning. And we rolled up our sleeping bags and put the sardines and pork and beans and stuff inside there. And then tied a string around it and made a bow out of a horseshoe and put it over our neck. That was our pack. And at the last moment, somebody asked if we had a pocket knife. We said no, and they handed us a little pocket knife, luckily. So we went up there and went across the ferry and went up in front of the Tetons. He let us out. And here it was a nice sunny day, and the Grand Teton up there, 6,000 to 7,000 feet above us. And it didn't look hard at all. Didn't look hard at all. And so we took off, practically running our timberline. And then we decided, look, why waste all that energy? We're not going to go up that canyon and go up to that saddle and all the way around to the west side and come up the west side the way Owen did it. Because any damn fool could see that you could climb right up that east side. And you see, I knew something about scrambling because we lived out at the edge of Snake River Canyon. We had to climb down there to fish and hunt. As a matter of fact, I think we owned the place where Evil Knievel tried to jump the Snake River Canyon some few years ago. So I knew how to scramble. There was no use going around there, up there. So, gosh, we all made almost record time getting the timberline. And right there at the base of the East Ridge, we saw at the foot of the glacier, there was a lake there with a delta in it. We called it Delta Lake. It's still Delta Lake. But I don't think it was Robert's Rock yet. We threw down our blankets with the pork and beans in them, and it was hot. We were sweating. So we left our sort of Levi-type coats there. Took off up there in our cowboy-type boots with slick leather soles, 1 pair of big overalls and 1 blue shirt. I don't think we wore underwear in those days. And up we went. And we scrambled and we were doing pretty good. Then suddenly we got up there. It was getting a little bit tougher. We were looking way down. And then we kept going. And suddenly it started to get dark. Well, make a decision. Yep. Nobody's going all the way back. There's a little crack here. We're going to stay here tonight, and when it gets daylight, we're going up. So it got dark. And then over in Pierre's hole, we heard Rip traveling. There was somebody over there, and there was big noises coming out of Pierre's hole. And suddenly black clouds roared over the Grand Teton. And I'll never forget it. You could see the lightning hitting the top of the peaks here and there. And thunder rumbling back and forth and re-echoing. I remember it now as a symphony. I didn't know what the word meant in those days. And then we had a little cloudburst. And we were very wet. And then the wind started to howl, and I mean howl. And then it started to snow. And that was the longest night in all history. Water froze on the rocks, made ice. Now we down there's called that bear glass. But it was just ice in those days. And the snow came on top of this ice, and that was slick. And next morning we could move slowly. But the only reason we survived is because hypothermia wasn't in the dictionary then. I never heard of it. But we couldn't, no way were we going to get down the way we came up. But we saw down below us in this gully, that's a cool bar now, but then there's a gully, was sort of a big platform. And we thought if we got down there, maybe we could get down another way. That's a decision mountaineers should make very seriously, going down another way. But we couldn't climb down there because the gully filled up with ice and it was full, I don't think quite as high as this ceiling down to this platform. So we just slid down that ice down to that platform. And then we looked down there and maybe it was starting to break, but the clouds were down below us too, and it was snowing uphill then. So we looked over there and I picked up a big rock and I threw it over there and it. Now you see, we were getting good judgment by now. We were developing our judgment. I knew that was too far to jump. But then, gosh, we couldn't get down that way, so we wanted to get back up where we spent the night, get out of there. But we couldn't get up this ice couloir. We used to trap, shouldn't tell city people this because I think it's awfully cool. We used to trap mice on the ranch in a bucket. Put something in the bottom of the bucket, and then you put a little stick up through the bucket, and they'd climb up there and drop down in the bucket, and then they couldn't get back out. And that's the way we were. We were trapped there. We couldn't get back out. And I think by that time we were crying. We knew we were dead. But we'd been reading saying grace, so we were going to die fighting. So, our trusty pocket knife with a blade that long, chopping a handhold, chopping a foothold, chopping another handhold, chopping another handhold. Well, in about an hour and a half, we chopped our way with this pocket knife up to the top and back to where we spent the night. And the reason I'm here today is because at that time the clouds parted. The storm was over. Suddenly it came. That happens in the mountains. The sun came out bright. Water started to run. The snow started to melt. And the sparrows came out and started hopping around on the snow. They're rosy finches now, but in those days they were sparrows. And by about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it melted enough so we could get back down. And by dark, we were down to our sleeping bags. And where we ate most of our food in big gulps and went to sleep. And woke up the next morning and ate some more and decided what we were going to do. And we just couldn't go back to Jackson. We couldn't go back and face those cowboys. By God, I lost nothing up there. Damn fools. Why does everybody want to climb the mountain? I'm riding a horse up there and they get a trail up there. So, hope springs eternal within the human breast, especially if you're 16 years old. So we decided we'd try it again. But we were a little sorry. We knew in order to get, now we had to traverse around the whole mountain to get over to the other side where we were supposed to be in the first place. And that was a bunch of snowfields, some of which were very steep. So we took our trusty pocket knife and whittled some sticks out of the little pine trees there. And then with one of those in each hand, getting up the next morning without breakfast, because that day when we were resting, we consumed all the food. Without breakfast, we started traversing around the mountain with these sticks so we could climb up the steep snow. And we got around finally to the owners. And believe it or not, made the top. Beautiful, calm, sunny day. And then when we got down to where the snowfields were, that would lead back to our sleeping bags, our judgment was a little better then. We knew we could not get down there because it was evening and the snow had hardened and we knew we couldn't get down. So we came on down the canyon and then we had to climb way up a wall and over a ridge and way down to our sleeping bags. It was a moonlit July night, and we managed to get back there at 3 o'clock in the morning. And so we had a couple of hours sleep before cutting up one of my mother's patchwork quilts and wrapping it around our feet since the soles of our shoes were torn. And heading down to the road, maybe later, or even then, I thought we looked like George Washington crossing the Delaware, all bundled up in our new shoes. But luckily, a car came by. That day, somebody managed to get through from Yellow. As a matter of fact, some of the ranchers used to go up there and camp all summer so that they could pull the cars through at least one place that was always bad. They had to hitch onto the car and pull them about a mile through the snow so they could get from Yellowstone to Jackson Hole. But he came by and picked us up and took us into the square in the middle of Jackson. And Jackson wasn't very big in those days. Everybody in town came out. They even stopped the poker game in the saloon. They all come out. And they all looked at us and looked at our feet too. And asked us if we got on top of the Grand Teton. Sure. You know, they looked like these kids are lying, you know. But Billy Owen was still there. Pretty soon he came running up through there and started to ask us questions, and we told him how we'd gotten to the top and how we'd crawled across the crawl and how we'd found this pennant that he'd left up there in 1898, the little metal pennant that said Rocky Mountains, I called it. And that it had 16 holes in it from lightning, and we found a jar with his name inside, so forth and so forth. And he put his hand on our shoulders and dramatically turned to the crowd and said, "These young men have been to the very top of the Grand Teton." Well, I've never topped that one. And Ralph Stokes had heard about his endeavors and he went home. And my mother had raised 9 children and she never discouraged me from my adventurous endeavors. And a rancher came up, Bill Lucas, came up and said, "I hear you're a farm boy," and I said, "Yeah." He said, "Can you stack hay?" And I said, "I sure in hell can." He said, "Well, I'll buy you a pair of boots and why don't you come out and work for me?" So the next day I was out stacking hay. And word got around that these kids had gotten up the mountain. And I suppose the dudes thought, "Gosh, if these kids can get up there, maybe we can get up there." And we had the duderances in our state, where people come out and take cowboy all summer. From the main line, Philadelphia, from Boston, other places, big dude ranch. And so people started to talk about going up there. And these guys appeared down there and said they wouldn't talk to me, and I jumped off the haystack, and they said, "Did you really get to the top of the Grand Teton?" And I used my boyhood expression, "Sure hell did." And they said, "Would you show us the way up?" They didn't say guy, they said, "Show us the way up." And I said, "Sure." And they said, "How much would you charge?" And I don't know today why I said this, because I was being paid the same as the other cowboys there, working in the hay fields and otherwise, which in those days was $1 a day and board. But I guess maybe I thought of the hypothermia, which I didn't know what it was called then. And I said, "How about $100?" Well, that started in the middle. And I said, "We'll talk it over." So they went back and I went to pitch it in. They talked for a while. They come back and yelled up. And so I jumped off and they said, "When can we start?" I said, "How about tomorrow?" 4 days later, I was back stacking hay with the summer wages in my pocket. I had a future. I had a racket. I was a guide. And that year I took up 3 more parties, and the next year I come back, and in a couple of years I was training my own guy. And of course, the number of great climbers who came from the guide trip at Teton, just phenomenal. So that's how the bear lost his tail, and that's how those little things that happen in your life affect you so much.
Pretty fun video, huh? I think we're switching that. We're switching the mic. Something happened. Is it on? Pretty fun video, huh? To hear him tell it in his own words. Just real quick, this is the article that was in the Des Moines Register that from an interview with Ralph Herron. There's some fun quotes in there. They describe the Grand Teton Mountain, the most celebrated Wyoming peak, said to be the most difficult in the United States. And Ralph, by the way, was 19 at the time. Paul was 16, Ralph was 19. He was a freshman at Monmouth College. And the article gives them credit for almost finding a route up the East Ridge, although they called it the East Face, that they got within 500 feet of the top and only stopped by the storm, which might be slightly exaggerated, but and it compares their climb very favorably with some of the most difficult and dangerous parts of the Matterhorn, the famed Swiss peak. And Ralph is quoted about talking how unpleasant their night in the crevice was. It's like 3 foot wide and 4 foot long. They piled up some stones to try to block the wind. And he said they'd gotten actually really stomach cramps from drinking icy water on their trip up. So they were nauseous and vomiting. He doesn't say all that in the article, but elsewhere they talk about that. And huddling together for warmth. Go back. And he's quoted as saying that there's little doubt that that pocket knife saved their life. If they hadn't had it, odds are they would not have gotten out of the mousetrap, as Paul described it. And Ralph, as Ron mentioned, was a poet and a playwright. And so he says in the article that he kept himself going by repeating a Robert Service poem in his head. And the lines were, "For the wanderlust has ruled me, and the wanderlust has schooled me, and I'm ready for the darkest trail of all." He's also quoted as saying, "Neither of us felt any fear," which I'm sure was for the newspaper article's benefit, and not actually true from other things they have said. They were sure it was over. They were pretty sure that they had reached the end of the road. But like Paul said, they were going to go down fighting because they've been reading Zane Grey. Okay. Should we start the video again? I think there's a few more things that Ron has on the video to share with us.
Let's one at a time. Just a minute. This is the same photograph that they used in the Des Moines Register. They actually had three of the photographs, and this is the same one that was printed in the paper at the time, which you've seen before. This is Billy Owen in the middle, Ralph on the left, and our hero on the right, Mr. Petzoldt. And originally we set this up so you could read it, but we figured it would be too difficult, so that's why Kim narrated it for you. And it just slides over here in just a second. And there's a nice, very descriptive article and a different perception than the exaggerated one that Paul has just given you. A little bit more down to earth. And it was good to have a second. And this is a result. I picked this up on YouTube. This is the result of our Petzoldt experience.
I think this is video put up by an Exum client, correct, right? Yep. So one of the many people that got up to the Grand Teton thanks to Paul Petzoldt.
So remember the Petzoldt pyramid. This is today's result. We stop it here. That's today's result. Is there's so many people climbing the Grand now and climbing the mountains in different parts of the world and experiencing these extreme sports. Today I woke up at 4 a.m. from the climbers camp, and I looked and I could see headlights going up a trail, I would imagine, going up there early. And then I went back to bed, and at 6 o'clock I got up there and there was about 8 people at the top already. And it's a good thing because the clouds then obscured the top for about 7 hours today. And the second party and third party was up there between 6 and 8:30, and then the clouds moved in. So that's the result of Paul kind of driving that excitement.
And I can tell you all those parties were Exum guides because I was on call this morning and they were all calling and texting me at 6 a.m. from the top of the Grand.
Yeah, they look quite happy, even though I can see their smiles. I know they were excited. And something about history is it often gets changed. And when I bought the photographs and realized what I had, and first thing I did was I looked to see what else existed in other collections in the different places. And there were 2 archives that had photographs. There was one in the state historical or the state archive somewhere in Wyoming, and there were 5 here at this museum. This is one of them. This is his second. This is his third ascent in about 3 weeks. The second one was chaos. People were lucky to live through it, and he decided at that point, after it was a failed ascent for two of his people, that he was going to take charge, and he did that, I think, very well and eloquently. And he began to listen to Geraldine Lucas and understand the client more and what she wanted to see, and guide her up there slowly and thoroughly and safely. Well, there was a number of people. It's Geraldine and Paul and let's see, Ike Powell and Frank Edmondson, and over here Jack Crawford. This is Jack Crawford's second ascent. He was in the first one. Go to the next. So this is one of 6 that exist from that era, but not from the first ascent. This is Geraldine, and the American flag that Budge and Edmondson brought up, and Jack Crawford. And she was the second woman to climb the Grand Teton. Eleanor Davis was the first 1 year prior. And this is a little chaotic. Everyone's doing the same thing at once, but we have Crawford, Budge or Edmondson, and Ike Powell and Geraldine. And we'll go to the next photo here. And the next one's kind of important. These two are not credited with making the ascent. In the role of all the people who ascended that was assembled from the beginning, Ellen Budge and Frank Edmondson were not on that roll. We'll see with the next slide. So this is how history gets changed. And this is how the photograph rescues histories and substantiates what actually took place. The next slide shows that they're clearly not here. Geraldine Lucas is here, Paul is here, Petzold's there, and Crawford is there. But Budge and Edmondson are not there. So this is one part of history, but the photograph substantiates that somebody else was there. So there needs to be a correction somewhere and give them credit for that ascent.
Also, the date is unclear because you had August 19th. This says August 16th. We've heard other dates as well.
Yeah, correct. And part of what I do is I check with a newspaper, how it was written in the newspaper. So we have to triangulate between a lot of different sources and come up with what sounds right or what is right. What's interesting is these people climbed the very next day, 3 more ascents the very next day after this successful ascent. So it was they were planning their ascent, but to see how close they were together. This is Petzoldt second ascent, the chaos ascent. This is the first one. Eleanor Davis, the first woman, and Ellen Wood here again. So it's nice to have a log, but the photographs also give you that substantiation in another way.
It's also important to know that not everything in the newspaper is correct. I don't know if any of you read the paper version of the article about this event, which said that Geraldine Lucas was the first woman to climb the Grand. Just a little mistake. It's corrected online, but just because it was printed doesn't mean it's accurate. So there's a lot of triangulation trying to figure out what actually happened and when.
Okay, let's go up one more advance it one more photo. All right, this is Paul Petzoldt, and the Ascension guide here from the museum says a few facts about him. We don't know the date of the photo, etc. Maybe it's the late 1920s. Well, some of the things I do to identify photographs, they're numerous. One of the things I do is I look at clothing, especially in this instance with Petzoldt and the images I have. Am I getting the feedback or are we competing? So what he's wearing today is there's only 2 photographs with that uniform. Looks like Levi's. It's got the little coin pouch, and it looks like a dark cotton shirt and an overshirt, and his hair, different things about him. And this, to me, is the day that he brought this, the beginning of the trip when he took Billy Owen up to make his own private ascent, the second time. And so let's see one more photo. Look at how he's dressed. Now we know the date of this photo in terms of my opinion. So this is William Octavius Owen. This is Billy Owen. You look at the Levi's, you look at the dark shirt, and this is his common hat. So this is Paul, and they brought Ike Powell with them to guide the horses, but they only went up there together, just the 2 of them. So Owen and the way he's dressed, and this is my photo. This is my photo. So by having this photo, I can tell what the other photo was about. And that's how things really triangulate and bring the facts to life. Let's advance it again. And here's another one from the State Archive. This is called Krieger, Petzoldt, and Melvin Whitehead, Twin Falls. Melvin and Whitehead from Twin Falls is a friend of Petzoldt, but Petzoldt made the photograph, so that can't be Petzoldt. The way I know that is because the next photograph in 2 shows that this is Ralph Herron, because Ralph Herron, this is in 1925, rather, when Ralph Herron fell and was severely injured. it took about two months to recuperate. This is Ralph Herron. See how he's dressed? Long boots, the same pack, the same color, the same hat.
Is it Ralph or Paul?
This is Ralph Herron.
That's Ralph.
So the first photograph was incorrectly labeled, but how would they know? If something is written on the back that says these people are in the photo, but they'll advance it and I'll show you why. For in my collection here, for these photographs, this is just before Ralph fell. This is Ralph. See how he's dressed? He looks like the guy in the middle on the first photograph. This is Paul Petzoldt. Different color pants, different boots, different hat, different face. So this is just before Herron fell, and he was on belay, so he fell too far, but he was severely injured. He had a knee injury, and the rope caught him and hurt him that way. But by having other photographs, you could substantiate the truth about another photograph, and that's kind of what's important to me. So now we know the real story here. We'll advance again. This is their 1925 ascent. Ralph was tragically killed. As I said, he was a playwright, and he would travel around to small towns like this, and hopefully larger towns with civic clubs. And he would go to the civic clubs here or there, and he would charm the people in civic clubs. So you must have talented children here in this town, and you know, if I trained them to put on a play, you could raise money, and you could present it in your auditorium, and then you would bring in some revenue. And if you do that revenue thing, then I get a cut. Your children will grow up with a different experience. Everybody will be happy, and then you can also board me while we're training the children. So what he would do is he traveled around the West. He traveled in Idaho, and he was killed in Nevada when he was hitchhiking from Carlin to Winnemucca. And he was hitchhiking from one place to another in the dark, and someone hit him. It was a tragic thing. He was 34 years old. He had no wife or child, but it was a terrible loss. Where it says one time a ranger in Yellowstone Park. Well, remember in 1925 he was here, recovering for a couple of months, and after that, in 1926, he became this ranger in the South Entrance. And the next year, he was a school teacher in the Elk School District for a year. In 1927-28, he was here, and he was also in 1926. He was back in Twin Falls doing a play. 1920, I got him note. I had that for 1920. Herron and another Twin Falls person was in Kellogg doing a play. They also worked on a fire suppression crew, putting out a forest fire there near Wallace. Then they were later in Payette, Idaho, producing a play called The Rose Dawn, which he did also in Buell, Idaho, which is near Twin Falls. So he was on the make all the time doing this thing. He did one also in Twin Falls where his good friend, Paul Petzoldt, was one of the characters. And Petzoldt was in, I don't know if it was The Rose Dawn or another one, but this is his livelihood. And I think he did very well at it. And he probably wrote enough, we'll stop it here, Tim. He did enough plays, probably writing and submitting play work to get a big job or have it copyrighted or have something special done with it, or royalties perhaps. This is a junior play. This is Mr. Petzoldt up here. You can kind of tell his stance looks a little like Paul Petzoldt. He's relaxed. And he was Mr. Man, the mystery, in this play by Paul Petzoldt. And he was in this junior play, which had rave reviews in the Twin Falls paper in 1926. He graduated in, of all things, Toledo, Ohio. He was always coming and going from the Twin Falls High School. It was a difficult childhood where his family just kind of disappeared. His mother moved east, and he went to live with his sister in Long Beach, California. So let's advance it a little bit. I'll actually do it again. This is just the write-up of how excited the crowd was. And I look for a lot of excitement and bursts of laughter and all that. So this is the junior roster. Let's stop it here, Kim. And these are the people in the junior class and what they like, dislike, favorite expression, acts, ambitions. And I tell you, when you read an old, yearbook, it's fantastic for some of the fun things they did. Paul Petzoldt didn't like, he liked to be rushed. He didn't like to be teased. His favorite expression was says which. He acts indifferently. Chief weakness was stagnant, and his ambition was a pugilist, which was a boxer. So things you find out. This is, by the way, how I identified Melvin Whitehead as I went to and he was 4 years older than Paul, so I went to the library and I went to the Twin Falls high school annuals, and I was able to find pictures of Melvin Whitehead, even though I worked for his descendant. One of my jobs would stop it here, and I was able to identify his face, which matched the one photo I said it was misidentified, etc. This is a fun one because this is about the late 1940s, and there's a candle photo. There's a photo, the official photographer of the park here at Teton, and the Grand Teton and the Rock of Ages, and this is Glenn Exum, and this is Paul Petzoldt, and it's a beautifully staged photograph. Wonderful photograph, just showing you that this is how it progressed. It went from one man's ambition to another one in a partnership, to more people being introduced, and more fun and more livelihood, etc. We'll advance again. And this is something about one of two photographs that were done about 1926. I shared this with Kim earlier. This is the west side of the Grand. And I suspect that this is Ellen Wood and this is Eleanor Davis. I suspect that because this looks like a female, and the two ascended the Grand themselves. But they also had a crew. And I'm not sure of this because I don't know if that's a female or not, but it's a slight figure. The second photo was a different view with a different published date. I can tell you when the photo was published, where it was published, and the time that they were publishing at that location. But I can't tell you who that person is. So it may be in 1920, this could be 1923, or it could be 1926 with one of the people of it was the Sierra Club. They made 2 ascents in August of 1926. They had good groups of people going up there twice. So it could have been part of that, but it's a very early, it was published before 1926 or thereabouts. We'll go to the next one. But this is fun for me to figure this out. But it's a different view. And I want to call your attention to this fellow who realized he's doing his own research for what's called the Iowa Mountaineers. And John Richard has a channel on YouTube, and you can type in Iowa Mountaineers in YouTube and find a preview to the film he's working on. And he does tremendous film work. He's the guy behind the camera. I met him because he knew about my Paul Petzoldt discovery, and he wanted to know if I had any Paul Petzoldt photographs of with the Iowa Mountaineers, which I do not. But he had one of Paul and his 2 brothers here in the Tetons in I think it's 1937 in this collection. So he's done some tremendous films that make you think. And that's what art is. Art makes you think. It stops you in your tracks and think, wow, what's this? A lot like what Paul Petzoldt sometimes did. And I'll leave you with this. If you read this carefully, maybe this will be memorable and you'll have a little fun reading this.
Can y'all read it? Do you want me to read it for you? It says, momentous issue is settled by debaters. A dozen members of the New Forum, a literary and debating high school association organized for practice, met last evening at the high school for a big feed and comic debate. The question for debate was resolved that chin whiskers are more of a handicap than bow legs. Howard Patrick, Howard Wiseman, and Dick Duvall argued eloquently for the affirmative, but were floored by the cold logic of Ed Colbert, Paul Petzoldt, and Ralph Webb, who won the decision.
Have fun.
Right. Thank you very much, Ron. Okay, so we have a few more fun things for you, but we've been sitting for a while, so if you want to stand up and stretch, I invite you to do that. We have some stories and we have another video, just a short one. But it's never good to sit for too long. So feel free to stand up, get the blood flowing. If you need to get going, feel free, but there's still fun stuff to share. If you've had enough of a stretch, go ahead and get seated. There's Nancy. Oh. Actually, if you want to go out and get another drink, your donations help the History Museum. So feel free to do that real quick.
You should try.
Do not walk past the speaker. Sorry about that. Okay, so what we have now, and I don't know if Peter's here to introduce it. Peter. Okay, so we have a short video. This is from the 60th anniversary of Paul Petzoldt's first climb of the Grand. So it's done in 1984, and Peter Palafian found this for us. We're gonna watch it.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I had to dig through my garage and this morning, this thing came up. It's an old 3/4 inch video, so it looks a little ragged, but I think it says a lot. I want to comment, I've known Paul for years and we haven't heard too much about Knowles, the National Outdoor Leadership School. Oh, we will, okay, good, okay. I won't tell my story, but because that was a huge thing that Paul gave us. And I wanted to get in the 70s, I wanted to get to know what was that all about. I was just a rock climber, and they had this Knowles thing, and so I arranged a contract to shoot a TV documentary about a Knowles group doing a Heart Lake Loop, which I thought would be indicative in the winter skiing. They were from Alabama, they'd never been on skis and all that, so we had a pretty good time. But me and my little crew would get up, we'd film them having breakfast and everything, then film them taking off. Then we'd have our breakfast and our coffee and pack up. Within about 20 minutes, we'd catch up with them when they get up. So, but it was, Knowles had it was that leisurely thing as it working on okay, I know, yeah, that's better. Anyway, so my hearing is questionable. And so I had been back in the 70s. I was had a good friend Pete Williams, who was the news director at KTWO in Casper, and we had done a 50th anniversary climb with Glenn Exum for the PBS, which worked out really well. And then I don't know, it was a couple years later, shortly thereafter, Paul Petzoldt's 60th anniversary came up, and Pete asked me if I'd like to go up and shoot that with him. So it was an interesting contrast between the two anniversaries. Glenn always seems to have the sun shining on him and everything is fabulous and goes smoothly like a Swiss watch and everybody's happy. Paul, I don't know, he maybe has a cloud over him, but we did run into some weather. It took 2 attempts actually, and Andy and Nancy were super loyal. And even though a lot of the group had sort of fallen away by the second attempt, they were not going to give up. And so we finally pulled it off. And Paul had a lot of stories on the way. But we'll run this only a 5-minute video, and hope you enjoy it.
All right, well, hoping that you can hear this because we literally got this just before the presentation started. So hopefully you can hear.
Can make it?
Yeah.
All right.
I'm very proud of it. It's up as much as I can go.
Let me take off my glasses, I can't see. Confucius said the journey of 1,000 miles starts with but a single step. We're out there to enjoy it. I think that when you go out and you're comfortable, you're not cold, and you're eating well, and you're enjoying each other, we have to teach expedition behavior. We have to teach people how to get around out there, especially when they're tired and things don't go right. And we're teaching expedition behaviors and how to technique. And I'm very proud of that.
60 years is a long time in a person's life, a long time in the history of this park. Grand Teton National Park isn't even yet 60 years old. But here comes Paul Petzoldt on his 60th anniversary climb of the Grand Teton.
I think. No, that. Then Geil, what Geil called cooking place. That's the kind of called the pro. Kimmy's like. Oh, no. I can enjoy it. It came from coon hunting. We used to coon around places instead of climbing.
Some other news.
Okay. Back to this. So, is it on? Yeah. Okay, so we have tonight with us Andy and Nancy Carson, who you just saw up at the summit with Paul Petzoldt. They were both wearing red. They were longtime friends with Paul Petzoldt. Andy was on the very first Knowles trip. They both worked with Paul at Knowles. You can see Nancy in some of the books that Ron has here on display. There's some great pictures of her in there. And they are former owners of Jackson Hole Mountain Guides, now the Mountain Guides. And so they're going to share a story or two, and we're going to open it up to any questions you have or other stories that you might have for those who want to hear more stories. So, Andy's going to go first.
Let's see if I can hold it in the right place. Good evening, everyone. Great turnout. I didn't prepare anything really for the evening.
Sorry, I'm taking it away from Andy, not because we don't want to hear him, but Morgan has to tell us something.
Sorry. Or everyone figured it out already that it's starting to rain. But there are seats up front if people want to come in underneath the canopy. And we can also perhaps move inside if it gets too full. But let's,
Yeah, so come on up. There's plenty of seats up here. You don't have to sit in the rain, but you can if you want.
Okay. So I did the Grand with Paul twice, and we tried a couple of times in the winter and were unsuccessful. But to comment on the two summer climbs, one in 1974, which Kim kind of alluded to Glenn's good weather. And in this instance, in 74, we had lovely weather and a group from Knowles, quite a lot of people, and Paul's brother Curly, Nancy and I took the group up to Exum Ridge, and Paul and the rest of the people went up to Owen, and it was a lark. It was fun. And then 10 years later, we get involved with Pelagian and weather issues. But really, we started out probably with 50 or 60 people. The weather was terrible. Got to the meadows and kind of bailed. And I thought, well, that's it. Good effort. Kind of nice to get to the meadows. And we got back to Wilson. A lot of people left. And Paul said, well, when do we go back? So smaller group went back and did a lot of drinking in the meadows, waiting for the weather to clear up. And really, in the end, on the summit, in the weather like this, Pelagian, Peter, and Mike Kehoe carrying the gear, Nancy and I, and Paul. So it was fun. It was great. And from that climb, I had this memory climbing down to the rappel, placing a friend, a rigid stem friend in those days. And Paul watched that and said, give me that. took it out, you know, I don't think we'd ever seen, stuck it in a crack, and I went, oh boy, the mind goes. We had these, but anyways, it was a wonderful trip, with Paul, despite the weather. And one other, little factoid, I thought Paul was, excellent and remarkable homegrown mountaineer. And representing that, is a climb he did, the northeast snowfields of Olin alone, which he made fun of and he demeaned often, people doing crazy things like climbing alone or climbing the Grand Teton with a friend. Anyways, he was, spouting off about solo climbers and troubles in the mountains and being responsible. And I said, Paul, what about the northeast snowfields? You soloed that. What were you doing? And he said, well, that wasn't really soloing. I was looking for new routes for my clients. And I thought, oh yeah, the northeast snowfield. Very unlikely. But it was always a pleasure to be with Paul in the mountains. He was there because he enjoyed it. And he enjoyed the people he was with and was a great friend. A wonderful person. So thank you.
And now we'll hear from Nancy Carson.
I didn't expect to be speaking tonight, but you can imagine what a treat it was to live in what people call the Petzoldt zone. Going up and down, and he was just, that story that was in the video at first. I mean, he was full of stories like that. I mean, it just go on and take you there with him. And as far as expedition behavior, I think that's one of the reasons that so many of the marriages that came out of NOLS have maintained, because he really taught us expedition behavior. It's vital skill. And well, I never expected to be historical, but thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
How many of you have participated in an OLS program? Got quite a few. And how many of you have done climbing with Exum or Guides for Exum? All right, so a lot of people here with a connection. So who else has a Petzoldt story they would like to share or a question they would like to ask? You do have to use the microphone.
Very briefly, if you haven't looked into it, I like reading mountaineering literature. Read about Petzoldt on K2. It will blow your mind. If you know the story and you haven't read it for 20 or 30 years, go back and reread it. It's one of the most extraordinary outings of an American climber in one of the big ranges. On Paul Petzoldt's, I think it was his 90th birthday, we had a little celebration up at Targhee. I went up and he told this story. Was a young man, was already getting the eyebrows. And I went into the barber. I was getting a haircut. And the barber said, "You want me to trim your eyebrows?" And the guy in the seat next to me looked at me and said, "Don't do it, kid."
What's your name?
I'm Neo, I live in Victor.
Who else? I know we've got good Petzoldt stories here. Ron will share another one.
I just want to say one thing about this research I did. I read all of these books to know more about them. This is about this, Patricia Petzoldt, his first wife, writes about the K2 experience. And that was quite a deal. All of these books are various different things. Some are objective, some are a little bit emotional, some are this, some are that. One that's fun, and it comes latest from right from his mouth, and someone wrote it for him out of interviews. Is this? Can't read the title because I've got my notes all over. It's called Teton Tales. It's affordable, it's used, and you can purchase it, and it puts it in a nutshell for you. It's very enjoyable, and it does a lot for establishing his character. Another one that's written that you could perhaps check out of the library is this was well researched for the Knowles, and especially part about Paul's early life and different things like that. The lady who did it especially did a nice job. The only thing that she named the Perrine Hotel Prin, and because I'm from Twin Falls, I know it's called Perrine. It's like the stagecoach was named Perrine Stagecoach, my book. So otherwise, perfect book for history. One other thing, in 1935, he was the official guide for the park, and $8 a day per person is what he charged. $8, that was during Depression, $8 a day. So these are the things I have to collect to substantiate what I told you tonight. I have to read all of this, and it was a gift. It was a gift that it was here to read. So I hope you enjoyed maybe a book in the future, and you can perhaps check it out at the library if you have a copy. I'm finished.
Okay, I have a story. Tom?
Oh, sorry.
Done so much? Yeah.
Second word.
Yeah, well,
Is this, okay. So in 1961, the Colorado Outward Bound School was founded, and Paul Petzoldt was the first chief instructor. And there's this hilarious old black and white film called As Tall as the Mountain. And it's a video of these teenagers doing this lizard head rappel, which is 160 feet. And Paul Petzoldt is relentlessly yelling at them to do a dolphin sit better. And they're just quaking with fear. And I just think it's interesting because there's this kind of rift sometimes between, outward bound instructors and Knowles instructors. And that's one thing that we have in common is this history and tradition that was rooted in Paul Petzoldt as well. So that was pretty cool as well for me.
thank you for bringing that up. As you can see, Paul had his fingers in so many of the organizations that have introduced people to the outdoors. If you're wondering about the K2, probably a lot of you know, but he did get set a record at the time for an American to get to the highest altitude without supplementary oxygen. And there's another fascinating story. After that, he went to India and stayed in ashram. His wife Patricia came out. The man running the ashram, his wife didn't like Patricia, started poisoning her. They got in a fight. The guy who ran the ashram fell, hit his head, and was killed. And then Paul was charged with manslaughter, but eventually acquitted. So there's so many more stories about Paul. We could tell them all night, but we are probably well past our time, and the weather is coming in. So I'd say we're going to call it good. But if you want to hang out inside, we can tell more stories. Hopefully you learned something, enjoyed the photos, and have a better appreciation for all that Paul has done for climbing and guiding and appreciation of the outdoors. Thank you.
I don't know.
I might have forgotten that detail.